You're about to hear a story with no villain, yet it'll still leave a lump in your throat, partner. It's not every day someone challenges Billy the Kid, and even rarer when it's for honor. But a man came down from the ice to do just that. A man who didn't smile, who didn't flinch, and who only wanted one thing before hanging up his guns: to find out if he was still the best. They called him Frost. He rode out of Canada, crossing endless miles, until he reached the place where desert dust cuts skin like a razor. He didn't want fame, not revenge, just respect, the kind of respect that's only born between two men with death at their heels and a lifetime on their backs. And when Billy got that message, "We meet in El Paso, 3 trials, for honor," he didn't think twice. He mounted his horse, spit in the dust, and rode off. Because sometimes, partner, the deadliest bullet isn't the one that kills, it's the one that weighs a man's soul. But before we continue with the video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is there. The wind howled through Lincoln County like a coyote with a broken leg. It was late afternoon when Billy the Kid pushed open the saloon doors, boots dusty, eyes sharp. The piano stopped. Folks looked. That's just what happened when Billy walked in. Rooms got quiet and drinks got still. He didn't smile, he didn't nod. He just walked to the bar like the whole town owed him breath. The bartender, a sun-dried man named Murph, slid him a whiskey without being asked. Billy took it, sipped. Then it came, a letter dropped on the bar by a drifter nobody recognized. No name, no word spoken, just a black envelope, cold to the touch like it had ridden all the way down from the Yukon. Billy stared at it a second, then opened. Inside was a folded sheet, the paper thick like parchment, hand-cut, ink as dark as grave dirt. "We meet in El Paso, 3 trials, for honor." Frost Billy read it twice. No threats, no insults, no payment offered, just a challenge. Clean, cold, final. He folded the letter, tucked it inside his coat, and tossed back the rest of the whiskey like holy water. Then he turned and walked out. No words. No explanation, just the creak of spurs and a man riding west with a look in his eyes that said something's coming, and it's wearing a damn coat from the north. He didn't pack much. He never did. A Colt he trusted more than God. A saddlebag with dry biscuits and a half bottle of rye. A photo folded in leather that nobody had seen in 10 years. And the letter. Murph stood on the porch as Billy saddled up. "Where you headed, kid?" Billy looked down the dusty road, chewing on the silence. "El Paso," he said. "You going for a fight?" Billy blinked slow. "No." And then, after a pause, "I'm going for a measure." El Paso wasn't a place you stumbled into. It was the edge of the known world. Past that was just dust and whispers. Billy rode for days, sun up to sundown, through dead valleys and towns where folks wouldn't say his name, but sure as hell knew it. Word got around. By the time he hit Fort Sumner, old gamblers were already betting on the match like it was the damn Super Bowl. The name Frost drifted like smoke. Some called him a ghost from Quebec. Others said he used to shoot coins mid-air just to feel alive. One fella claimed Frost once shot a candle out at 200 yards in a snowstorm just to light his cigarette. But Billy didn't listen to the noise. He just rode, because this wasn't about Frost. This was about the man Billy used to be, and whether he still was. On the 5th day, he stopped in a ghost town chapel. Empty pews, crosses hung crooked. He knelt, not to pray. He didn't believe in that, but to breathe. He touched the pistol on his belt like a priest touches his Bible. He whispered, "If this is my last ride, let it be worth the dust." Night fell before El Paso showed its lights. The town was quieter than it should have been, like it knew something, like it was holding its breath. And there, at the far end of the saloon street, stood a man in a black duster, arms crossed, eyes like glaciers. He didn't move, didn't speak, just waited. Billy stepped off his horse. Dust rose. Their eyes met across 30 paces of dirt, and in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not threats, just recognition. 2 men who'd stared down death so many times they'd stopped flinching. 2 men who weren't there to kill, They were there to be seen. Long before he stood face to face with Billy the Kid, Elijah Beaumont was already a ghost in the minds of men. They called him Frost, and not just because he came from the frozen ridges of British Columbia. No, they called him Frost because the air around him felt colder when he walked in, like the sun gave up trying to warm him. No one really knew where he came from, not exactly. Some said he was raised by fur traders in the Yukon, learned to shoot with a flintlock rifle older than his father. Others claimed he'd served as a scout during the Red River conflicts and could track a man by scent alone. But if you asked Elijah himself, he'd just say, "I shoot straight, I ride alone, and I don't repeat myself." That's all anyone ever got. The first man Frost ever killed was his own brother. That much was true. Word is the brother came home drunk one night, waving a shotgun and swearing Frost stole his girl. There was no fight, no shouting. Frost just stood up from the porch, looked him in the eye, and fired once, right between the buttons. He buried the body himself under a cedar tree. Never spoke of it again. In the years that followed, Frost moved south. He never stayed in one town more than a week, never drank more than a single shot of whiskey, never slept with whores, never smiled. He was a man driven not by revenge or greed, but by something quieter, the need to be measured, not against others, but against himself, over and over. He would show up in some dusty town, challenge the local hotshot to a shooting match, not to the death, just to the test, then leave before the sun set again. No one knew what he was looking for until he said Billy's name. Word reached El Paso a week before Billy arrived. "Frost's looking for the kid," folks whispered in the saloon. "But he ain't looking to kill him. He's looking to prove something." Some took bets. Most shook their heads. Billy was legend, not just for his speed, but for his heart. The kind of man who'd shoot a sheriff at dawn and hand candy to a kid by noon. You didn't challenge Billy the Kid unless you had a death wish or a death need. And Frost? He just waited, sat outside the hotel with a silver flask and a book of poetry of all damn things. Didn't talk, didn't blink. One boy tried to sneak up behind him. Just a prank, they said. Frost didn't move. Just said, soft as snow, "You get one chance to walk away, son. This is it." The boy ran. That night, Frost sat by the fire behind the stables, a tall, thin man with white hair and hands that didn't shake. He carved a bullet with a knife, not to use, but as a kind of meditation. A local preacher came out to talk to him. "You setting up to kill Billy the Kid?" Frost looked into the flames. "No." "Then why you here?" He paused, then said, "Because if I don't do this now, I'll die not knowing." Upstairs, in the room he'd rented, there was a small wooden box. Inside were three things: a faded photo of a woman with sad eyes, a bullet with no markings, a folded piece of paper with one name written in black, William Bonney. By the time Billy rode into town, Frost had already mapped the place, knew the angles, knew the light, knew the distance between heart and barrel from every spot on Main Street. But when he saw Billy dismount, he felt something strange. Respect, not fear, not challenge, just a nod between warriors, because some men shoot for power, some for pride, and some for the mirror. The trials would begin at sunup, and somewhere deep inside, Frost whispered to himself, "Let the shots be true, let the measure be clean, and if I fall, let it be before a man worthy of it." Billy didn't sleep that night, not because he was afraid. No, fear had left him years ago, somewhere between the third jailbreak and the fifth funeral. What kept him awake was something colder. Weight, not in his bones, but in his blood. The letter from Frost burned in his coat pocket like a coal wrapped in paper. 3 trials for honor. He kept reading those words in his head, trying to find the threat, the game, the angle, but there was none. Just clarity, the kind of clarity that only came before death or redemption. The dawn broke slow and pale, sky still purple with sleep. Billy stood outside the livery stable, brushing down his black gelding, a horse that had carried him through bad towns and worse men. He worked slow, methodical, every stroke like a prayer. Then he opened his saddlebag. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were the tools of his gospel. 1 Colt, .45, short barrel, pearl grip. A Henry rifle with initials carved in the stock. JB. 6 bullets he'd kept from 6 men who'd tried to kill him. One had blood still caked near the rim. He packed them with the care of a man who didn't plan to shoot, but knew he might have to. At the general store, he bought nothing, didn't need supplies, didn't need food. But he stopped at the front, saw an old prospector selling maps drawn by hand. Maps of mines, trails, outlaw hideouts long buried. One of them had something written in the corner: "Truth is a kind of gold, only harder to find." Billy folded the map, bought it with a silver coin, and walked away without a word. The saloon was already buzzing. Word had spread. The kids in town. Some came for the show, some came for the legend, but most came because they knew, deep down, this wasn't just another shootout. This was a passing of the torch, or maybe a lighting of the fuse. Either way, something big was about to echo across the west. At high noon, Billy stood at the center of Main Street. Dust blew, heat shimmered. The whole town watched from porches, windows, rooftops. Kids sat on barrels, old men chewed on silence. And then he came, Frost, walking like death wore boots, long coat, wide hat, revolver riding low, like it didn't need to move fast to matter. He stopped 10 paces from Billy, nodded once, and for the first time, they spoke. "William Bonney," Frost said. Billy nodded. "That's what they call me. You really come all this way just to dance with a ghost?" Frost didn't smile, but something softened in his voice. "I came to see if I still cast a shadow." The town held its breath. Then a voice, the mayor, or maybe just some drunk with guts, shouted, "First trial starts tomorrow. High noon, Alamo Yard, clay pigeons." The crowd murmured. Billy looked at Frost. "You ever shoot in this kind of heat?" Frost answered without blinking. "I've shot through snow so cold it cracked bone. This ain't heat. This is mercy." Billy chuckled. "All right then." That night, neither man slept. Billy sat on the porch of the boarding house, cleaning his rifle in the dark. Frost sat outside the church, staring at the moon like it owed him an answer. No one knew what to expect from the morning, but everyone knew one thing. The Old West had seen its share of shootouts, but it had never seen 2 men fight not to kill, but to prove they still mattered. El Paso was waking up slow, like a drunk after a long bender. The sun cracked the horizon and spilled gold over the rooftops, but the heat was already rising, not just from the desert floor, but from the tension hanging in the air. Folks walked quieter that morning. Even the horses seemed to sense something was coming. And Frost, he was already awake. He stood at the edge of town, on a small bluff overlooking the saloon and Main Street, coat pulled tight against a sun that didn't know the meaning of mercy. He didn't flinch, didn't squint. He just stood there, arms crossed, eyes scanning every inch of the town like a general before battle. To a stranger, he might have looked out of place. Pale skin, long frame, white hair slicked back like frost on a window pane. But if anyone got close, really close, they'd see the truth. This man belonged nowhere, and that made him dangerous everywhere. He stepped down the hill and walked into town like he'd done it 100 times before. No hurry, no swagger, just steady steps like the ground owed him each one. People watched, they always did, but he didn't watch back. He wasn't there for them. At the blacksmith's, he paused, not to fix anything, just to feel the heat of the forge. "Hotter 'n hell today," the smith said. Frost nodded. "Good. You ain't from around here, huh?" Frost turned, his voice low. "Not from anywhere I'd go back to." And with that, he walked on. He passed the saloon, the church, the telegraph office, each one full of men pretending not to look. But he knew the looks. He'd worn them once, long ago, in the North Woods, staring at legends who didn't know his name yet. Now they stared at him like a riddle wrapped in a coffin. At the shooting yard on the edge of town, an old corral with busted fences and crows that never left, Frost set down a box of ammo and pulled out his rifle. Not the new kind. No fancy levers or polished sights, just a worn, straight-shooting repeater with a carved handle and a cold trigger. The initials EB scratched into the metal like a memory. He took aim at a tin can 100 yards out. Crack! The can flipped once, hit the ground, dead center. He didn't even check, just reloaded, fired again and again and again. By the time the sun hit high, there were no cans left, just scraps of metal and dust. Frost packed the rifle back up, stood still for a long second, then said to no one in particular, "Tomorrow the measure begins. Let it be clean." That evening he sat behind the church, watching the town glow under the last red light. A little girl walked up to him, no older than 7. Dirty face, tangled hair, she held a penny in her hand. "You a killer?" she asked. Frost looked at her, then at the penny. "No, I'm a reminder." "Of what?" He leaned forward, his voice softer than the breeze. "That not all endings need blood." She dropped the penny in his hand and ran off. He turned it over in his fingers, stared at the worn edges, then pocketed it, not for luck, but for balance. That night, as the desert cooled and the town fell silent, Frost wrote one line in his journal: "I am no longer here to win, I am here to be worthy." They met at the edge of town. No crowds, no drawn guns, just dirt underfoot, heat in the air, and 2 men who had no business still being alive, much less respecting each other. Billy the Kid leaned against a hitching post, arms crossed, hat pulled low, a half smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. He looked like a man waiting for a train that might never come, and not minding one bit. Frost walked up slow, boots silent, eyes locked. And for a full 10 seconds, they just stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle like dust on an old grave. "You're taller than I figured," Billy said finally, pushing off the post. "You're younger than they say," Frost replied. Billy shrugged. "Depends who's talking. Most folks only saw me riding away." Frost gave a nod. "I never needed to chase you." A beat passed, a silence heavy, but not hostile, like 2 old dogs circling before lying down in the same dirt. "You bring your own rules?" Billy asked. "Just one," Frost said. 3 trials, no blood, clean measure, you agree?" Billy scratched his chin, then smiled. "You might be the only man west of the Mississippi who came looking for me without wanting a grave at the end." Frost didn't smile back. He just said, "I already carry too many graves. I came for balance." They walked side by side toward the center of town. No crowds yet, just whispers from behind curtains, little faces peeking through windows. But word had spread. Everyone knew. Today, the West paused, not because of war, but because 2 men, both feared, both fabled, had come not to destroy each other, but to measure truth. At the saloon, they sat across from each other. No drinks, just water and stillness. "Why me?" Billy asked finally. "Out of all the gun hands and showboats in the world, why pick me?" Frost looked him dead in the eyes. "Because you didn't die when they said you would, and neither did I. So maybe we owe the world an ending that don't stink of fear." Billy leaned back in his chair, let that sink in, then nodded. "Fair enough." Outside, the mayor tried to organize the first trial. Clay pigeons, high noon, no bets, no calls, just 2 men, 12 shots each, in the open yard. But truth be told, the town didn't care who hit what. They were watching for something else. Grace, respect, maybe even redemption. Before they parted, Frost handed Billy a folded handkerchief. Inside was a .22 bullet, clean, untouched, no markings. "What's this?" "A marker," Frost said. "If either of us cheats the rules, we carry that bullet for the rest of our lives." Billy turned it in his hand, nodded slowly. "All right then, let's see who still casts a shadow." And as the sun reached its peak and the birds scattered from the rooftops, El Paso braced itself for not a shootout, but a reckoning. High noon hit El Paso like a hammer. The sun didn't shine. It burned heavy and blinding, turning dust to gold and sweat to salt. Folks gathered in silence along the fence line of the old Alamo yard, squinting through the heat waves rising off the dirt. There were no cheering crowds, no brass bands, just wind, and 2 men standing 20 paces apart, hands resting near steel. But they weren't aiming at each other. They were aiming at the sky. The trial was simple, at least on paper. 12 clay pigeons, launched one by one from a rusty old thrower. Each man got 6, no second chances, no fancy gadgets, just a rifle, a heartbeat, and the eyes of the world. Whoever shattered more won the first round. No blood, just skill. Billy went first. He stepped up slow and casual, as if he were about to spit tobacco, not aimed down the sights. His rifle was old but cared for, same one he'd used to shoot bottles off a moving rail car, back when he was 16 and stupid. The boy manning the launcher gave a nervous nod. "Whirr! Crack!" The pigeon flew. Billy fired. Boom! Dust. Gone. The crowd gasped like they forgot who they were watching. 5 more shots. 5 more hits. 6 for 6. Billy tipped his hat like he'd just swept a porch. Then came Frost. No warm-up, no expression, just a slow breath and the steady motion of a man who didn't blink at war. First, clay flew, and the sound of Frost's shot was different, sharper, cleaner. Like the gun was part of his blood. Smash, then another. And another. Each shot was a whisper of death, each clay shattering like thin ice under a boot. 6 for 6. Perfect. But that wasn't the part that got the town talking. No, it was how they shot. Billy hit his clays like he was punching back at life, quick, brutal, flashy. Frost hit his like he was removing a burden, precise, gentle almost, like he didn't want to break them, but had to. When the dust settled, the mayor stepped forward. Tied, he said. Nobody cheered, because this wasn't about the scoreboard. It was about realization, that they were watching two men at their peak, giving the world the kind of silence that only comes when legends meet in the middle. Billy holstered his rifle, walked over to Frost, and held out his hand. Frost stared at it for a second, then took it, a grip firm, unshaking. "Looks like you still cast a damn big shadow, Frost," Billy said. "Yours ain't small either, Bonnie." And with that, they turned and walked away. Not enemies, not friends, but equals. That night, no one in town could sleep, not because they were scared, but because they'd seen something rare. Two men, both ready to die, choosing instead to prove they still mattered. And in the West, that meant more than killing ever did. The sun dipped behind the church steeple, turning the sky the color of old whiskey. El Paso fell into that strange quiet only found in towns waiting for something to end or begin. No card games, no piano, just the creak of wood and the distant howl of coyotes too smart to come near. And in that stillness, two men sat alone, in places they didn't belong, listening to memories louder than any crowd. Billy sat behind the saloon, back against the wall, boots stretched out in the dirt. His hat was tilted low, eyes half closed, chewing on a sliver of mesquite like it owed him answers. His rifle leaned nearby, still warm from earlier. He wasn't thinking about the trial, not exactly. He was thinking about the names, the ones he couldn't forget. Charlie Boda, Tom O'Folliard, Pat Garrett, boys who laughed too loud, men who died too soon, friends who rode with him until the law caught up or the bullets did. "We used to think the dust would never settle," he muttered. Now it had. And all that was left was him, and a man from the snow who shot like a whisper. Across town, in the shadows near the chapel, Frost sat on a broken bench, cleaning his rifle with the same cloth he used the day his brother died. He moved slow, precise, like every motion was a ritual. Above him, the stars started poking through the twilight, one by one, and for the first time in years, he noticed them. He reached into his coat, pulled out a crumpled photo, a woman, dark eyes, soft mouth. The kind of face a man doesn't forget, no matter how far he rides. He stared at her for a long time. "I'm still here," he said quietly. "Don't know why, but I am." Later that night, by coincidence or fate, the two men found themselves on opposite ends of the same porch. No one else around, no whiskey, just moonlight and silence. Billy nodded first. "Hell of a shot today." Frost returned the nod. "Yours too." They sat for a moment, no words, just two old war horses in different saddles. Then Billy asked, "What are you really after, Frost? 'Cause it sure ain't glory." Frost took a deep breath. "I need to know if I still matter." Billy looked off into the dark. "That why you don't drink? Don't gamble?" Frost shook his head. "Because I already lost what I cared about." The wind picked up, cold for a desert night. Billy shivered once, then said, almost too soft, "Funny thing is, I think you came all this way to remind me of something." Frost turned to him. "What's that?" "That maybe a man's still got time to die, right?" They sat like that for a long while, two shadows in the dark, carrying years too heavy for any horse to bear. When they finally stood to leave, no words were exchanged, only a look, the kind of look that says, "I know your ghosts. I got mine too." And as they disappeared into the night, one to the left, one to the right, the town behind them held its breath, because tomorrow came the second trial. And no matter who won, the real fight was already happening inside. At sunrise, El Paso was still, like the desert was holding still out of respect. The second trial was set outside town, in an old dried-up cotton field that hadn't seen water since the war. Dust swirled at the ankles, crows circled above like they were waiting for something to drop. And there, marked by wooden stakes and old rope, stood 100 paces of raw judgment. A single tin plate, white, hung on a pole at the far end. 1 shot each, 1 bullet. Whoever hit closest to the center won. No showmanship, no second tries, just you, your breath, and the truth. Billy arrived first. He wore the same boots he'd worn at Fort Sumner, the soles nearly worn through. His hand brushed the grip of his rifle like it was a church door. He looked out at the target and muttered, "Ain't nothing that far if you're ready to lose everything." Frost came walking up behind him, hat low, rifle slung over his shoulder. He didn't speak, not at first, just stood beside Billy and stared at the plate like it had insulted him personally. Then he asked, "Ever shot 100 paces before?" Billy smirked. "Once. Wind was worse. I wasn't better." Frost gave a rare, thin smile. "We'll see who the dust respects." The crowd stayed back. No grandstands, no mayor this time. Just whispers and the kind of hush that follows lightning before it strikes. Billy stepped up first, rifle loaded, one eye closed. He took a breath, let it out, and pulled the trigger. Crack! The echo rolled over the plain like thunder. The plate rang like a church bell, wobbled slightly, but didn't fall. A clean hit. Then Frost walked forward. He didn't take long, no theatrics. He aimed with both eyes open, calm as a man lighting a pipe. Crack! Again the plate rang. Again it stood, but this time it rang softer. Billy raised a brow. "Closer than mine." The young deputy, walking out to check, didn't say a word. He just held up 2 fingers, maybe an inch apart, then held one slightly higher. Frost had hit dead center. Billy whistled low. "Hell, guess the cold makes your hands steadier." Frost nodded once. "The cold and regret." But Billy didn't look bitter, just thoughtful. "You needed this one," he said. "I can see that now." Frost looked at him, something almost human in his eyes. "We both need something. I just remembered it first." Back in town, no one said much. Because the people weren't watching for scores anymore. They were watching for truth. And today, the truth was this. Even legends can learn from each other. That night, no one drank. Even the saloon girls stayed quiet. It wasn't mourning, and it sure wasn't celebration. It was something else. Respect. Because the West had seen shootouts, but never something like this. The desert turned cold after sundown, like it always does. That sharp kind of cold that don't ask permission, just slips into your bones. And out behind the livery, under a moon thin as a knife blade, 2 men sat near a small fire, the flames flickering like they were nervous to be in the company of such ghosts. Billy poured the coffee. Frost didn't ask for any. They just sat, rifles beside them, steam rising from tin mugs, both looking into the fire like it owed them something. "You ever think about the ones that didn't get to sit by the fire?" Billy asked, voice low. Frost didn't look away from the flames. "Every night." Billy took a sip, let the silence ride a few seconds. Then, "I shot a man once in Cimarron. He wasn't fast, wasn't even mad, just drunk, thought I was someone else. I pulled before I even knew his name." He swallowed hard. "That one don't leave." Frost didn't speak right away. He reached into his coat, pulled out that folded photo, the woman with the soft eyes, held it out. Billy took it, looked, didn't ask her name, didn't have to. "What happened?" Frost's eyes didn't blink. His voice was just wind. "I left." She didn't wait. He put the photo back. "Thought I had time, thought I had purpose." Then he looked at Billy. "Now I have distance. That's all." The fire cracked. Somewhere in the dark, a dog barked once, then shut up like it remembered who it was barking near. Billy leaned back against a hay bale. "You know, when I was younger, I used to think dying in a blaze of glory would mean something." He shook his head. "Now I think living through it means more." Frost nodded. "Only the lucky get to feel that kind of regret." They sat there, not talking for a long time, just letting the flames dance, like old guns with the powder gone, still warm from use. Eventually, Billy reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out the bullet Frost had given him, the one meant to carry the weight if either man cheated. He held it up. "Still clean." Frost looked at it, then at Billy. "Let's keep it that way." Billy tucked it back inside, smiled just a little. Before they parted, Billy asked one more question. "After this last trial, you going back?" Frost stood, brushing dust from his coat. I'll go somewhere. North? Frost looked at the stars, eyes heavy. Only if I lose. And with that, he walked off into the night. Billy stayed a while longer, staring into the fire, remembering the names, letting the weight settle, because tomorrow the final trial would come, and whatever happened out there, they'd earned it. Sleep never came for Billy that night, not the kind that rests the bones. He laid in that boarding house cot, arms behind his head, boots still on, staring at the cracked ceiling like it might give him answers. But all it gave him were shadows, long ones, shaped like choices he never took and people he never saved. And then the dream came. He was in a graveyard, only it wasn't dusty and dead like the ones in Lincoln. It was green, peaceful, like something out east where it rains and people die old. He walked past rows of tombstones, familiar names, too familiar. Charlie, Tom, Jesse, Ma. And then he saw it, his own name, not Billy the Kid. No nicknames, no legend, just William H. Bonney's son. Friend, gun hand, gone. And underneath, a phrase carved deep into the stone. He died before he knew he lived. Billy jolted awake, sweat on his chest, dust in his mouth. The fire in the hearth had gone cold, but the weight on his chest hadn't. He sat up slow, ran a hand over his face, and looked at the little desk in the corner, the one with the old mirror cracked down the middle. For a long minute, he stared at himself. Not the outlaw, not the kid, just the man, tired, older than his years. And somewhere behind his eyes, fear, not of dying, but of not mattering when it ended. Downstairs the town was quiet, but not empty. He stepped outside into the cool dark, boots hitting the porch like quiet thunder. Frost was already there, leaning against the post. Like he knew. You feel it? Billy asked. Frost didn't look at him, just nodded. Dreams don't lie, they just talk in riddles. Billy lit a match, then didn't smoke, just held the flame a second, watched it burn. I saw my grave. Frost turned his eyes toward the street. Was it empty? Billy thought. Then, no, it was too full. They stood like that for a while. The final trial wasn't until noon. But the truth had already started. Every breath from here on out was borrowed. And when the sun finally peeked over the roofs, cutting long shadows across El Paso, two men stood ready. Not for a duel, not for victory, but for a reckoning. The sun stood straight overhead, mean and merciless. The kind of heat that don't just dry your throat, it tests your will. And in the middle of that burning silence, two wooden figures stood side by side in the old cattle ring on the south end of town. Man-sized, rough-hewn, straw-stuffed. One wore Billy's old coat, the other Frost's black duster, stitched on by a saloon girl who said she'd never sewn anything so sacred. At their chest, pinned firm with rusty nails, a red apple. Behind it, a steel plate the size of a man's heart. This wasn't about speed, it wasn't about flash, it was about precision. The kind you only get when your soul's steady and your conscience don't shake your aim. One shot each. Hit the apple, hit the heart behind it. Miss, and you miss the point entirely. Billy stepped up first. He checked the wind and barely a breeze, licked the pad of his thumb, felt the dryness. He looked at the dummy dressed like him, worn, weathered, too familiar. You ever shoot at your own ghost, Frost? He asked without turning. Frost stood a few paces back. Every damn day. Billy raised his rifle. Steady now. He didn't blink, didn't breathe. He thought about Charlie's laugh, about his mother's hands, about the one girl in Lincoln who ever kissed him without fear. He exhaled. Crack. The apple burst like blood, and the steel behind it clanged loud and true. Dead center. Then came Frost. He took longer, not out of nerves, but because he was choosing something, choosing what to leave behind. He walked up to the line, unfolded a note from his coat pocket, folded it again, tucked it inside the dummy's coat. Billy squinted. What's that? Frost didn't answer. He just shouldered the rifle, eyes cold, calm, and for the first time the town noticed his hands were shaking, not from fear, from weight, from carrying too much for too long. He whispered something to the barrel. No one heard. Then he fired. Crack! The apple vanished, gone like it never existed, and the plate behind it didn't move. Dead center. No one spoke, not even the wind. It was over, but no one cheered, because this wasn't a contest. It was a confession, and both men had told the truth. Billy walked up to Frost, held out the bullet from his pocket, the one they'd agreed to carry if either broke the rules. He dropped it between them in the dirt. "We don't need this no more." Frost looked at it, then at Billy. "No, we don't." They stood there, two shadows under the same sun, two men who had nothing left to prove, to each other, to the West, or to themselves. The trials were over. The crowd lingered, quiet as a wake, not sure whether to cheer or pray. Folks shuffled their boots, tipped their hats, looked around like they'd missed something, because no one had drawn on the other, no guns pointed, no blood spilled, just two perfect shots into the hearts of straw men. The sheriff approached, wiping sweat from his neck. "Well, that's it, I suppose." Billy looked at Frost. "Suppose it is." Frost nodded. The moment stretched. If this were any other day, any other place, two legends would have drawn. One would fall, the other would live on in stories bigger than the truth. But not today, not these two. Billy stepped forward, his boots kicking dust, slow and deliberate. He drew his revolver. Frost didn't flinch. Billy opened the cylinder. 6 bullets inside. He took one out, spun it once between his fingers, then dropped it on the ground. Then another and another, until all 6 lay in the dirt at his feet. "I'm done killin' for applause." Frost didn't move, just stared at the revolver, now empty in Billy's hand. Then he stepped forward and reached into his coat, slow, careful, and pulled out his own weapon. He turned it, offered the grip to Billy. Billy took it, checked it, unloaded. "Not a single round," Frost said quietly. "I never brought bullets for you." Billy looked down at the guns in both hands, then handed Frost's weapon back. "Then I guess neither of us came here to win." "No," Frost said. "We came here to finish." They stood side by side now, facing the town. 2 figures against the heat haze, their shadows long and unshaken, and the people, watching from porches and behind barrels, started to understand. This was bigger than victory. This was 2 men standing tall in a world that tried to shrink them. Someone in the back clapped, then another, until the town, slowly, uncertain at first, rose to its feet. No shouting, no fanfare, just quiet, heavy respect. Billy looked at Frost, eyes tired but clear. "What now?" Frost gazed down the long road out of town. "Now we ride. You go your way, I go mine." Billy nodded. "And if we meet again?" Frost smirked, just a little. "Then I hope it's over coffee, not ghosts." And as they turned, heading in opposite directions, the bullet Billy dropped caught the light in the dust, spinning slow, untouched, unused, and maybe that was the real shot that mattered. The sun dipped lower, casting El Paso in a gold too soft for a town built on grit. Billy rode south, Frost rode north, and for the first time in years, the road behind them didn't feel like escape. It felt like peace. The townsfolk didn't say much that day. They went back to their shops, their porches, their lives, but every now and then, someone would pause mid-task, like remembering a sound that never came, because no guns were fired, no blood was spilled, yet everyone felt changed. At the saloon, Murph the bartender set 2 glasses on the bar, didn't fill 'em, just left 'em there, side by side, for the ones who didn't need to kill to be remembered. The little girl who gave Frost the penny, she went back behind the church and found it in the dirt, where he'd left it, polished, clean, with something etched in, "Still matters." She kept it, never spent it. The sheriff sat on his porch, staring down Main Street, took a long pull from his flask, then muttered, "Ain't about who's fastest anymore, it's about who walks away whole." And that bullet Billy had dropped? A boy picked it up later that night, asked his father what it meant. The old man just said, "It means some men shoot to win, but the real ones, they know when not to fire." The legend would spread, but not loud, not through dime novels or barkers in traveling shows, just through quiet words, passed around campfires and cattle drives. Words like, "I saw Billy the Kid and Frost. Neither man flinched, neither man fired, and both walked away taller than when they came." Because that's the thing about honor, partner. It don't bleed, it don't brag. But when it shows up, it leaves a mark no bullet ever could. Billy didn't look back. He never did. He rode slow out of El Paso, the horses' hooves soft on the dirt, like they knew better than to rush. The sky above was a tired blue, the kind you see after a storm that never came. His rifle was strapped tight behind him, but it didn't feel heavy anymore. The weight was somewhere else now. Frost rode north. No bags, no supplies. Just that coat, that rifle, and a small wooden box tied behind his saddle. Inside was the photo, the old bullet, and the folded note he'd left inside the straw dummy, the one no one saw but him. It said, "I was here. I mattered. That's enough." Neither man spoke a final word. There was no handshake, no dramatic turn of the head, just two silhouettes on different trails, and a silence that spoke louder than gunfire ever could. Billy passed a family on the road. Father, mother, child. The little girl smiled, waved. Billy tipped his hat. For the first time in years, he smiled back. Frost crossed a dry creek bed where once he'd slept, half dead, half starved, chasing someone who'd already forgotten him. Now he wasn't chasing anything. He was carrying something. At the top of a ridge, just as the sun was dying red in the sky, Frost stopped, looked back once. Not at the town, but at the moment, the choice. Then turned forward again, eyes ahead, heart clean. Because some men ride to escape, some ride to survive. But these two, they rode away not because they had to, but because they finally could. Years passed. El Paso changed. New buildings rose. The cattle moved on. Trains came louder, and the dust settled quicker. And the story, well, it didn't roar, it whispered. Old men in saloons told it like a secret too holy to shout. "Billy the Kid," they'd say, voice raspy from smoke and time, stood face to face with a man called Frost. And instead of shooting, they measured each other the way only men on the edge can. Some didn't believe. Most just nodded slow. Because if you've ever looked down a barrel and seen yourself staring back, you understand. The dummies from the trial were never burned. Some say the town buried them. Others say a preacher took them to the hills, gave them a proper rest like fallen soldiers. But the memory remained, in the clink of a whiskey glass, in the hush when someone draws too quick, in the space between two legends who chose to live, not just survive. One boy grew up to be a lawman, said he once found a bullet in the street, engraved with a word, mercy. He kept it in his pocket for 30 years, said it saved him more times than his badge. Frost was never seen again, not by any lawman, bounty hunter, or whispering soul. Some say he crossed the border. Some say he laid down his rifle beside a frozen lake up north and walked into the woods, never to return. But Billy showed up once, years later at a small town wedding. No gun, no smoke, just a smile and a toast. 2 second chances. If this story stirred something in you, partner, if you felt the weight of a shot that never came, if you saw in these two men a piece of yourself, tired, proud, stubborn, still breathing, then maybe you understand why sometimes justice don't wear a badge. And peace. Peace comes when a man leaves the bullet in his pocket. If this story stirred something in you, if you held your breath in the silence of that final shot, if you saw yourself in Billy and Frost, 2 men chasing something deeper, if what drives you isn't fame or noise, but honor, respect, and justice carved by your own hands, then pull up a seat by this fire, subscribe now to the channel, and ride with us through more stories, real or almost real, from the Old West, the kind that tightens your chest and eases your soul. Because around here, partner, we don't tell stories just to entertain, we tell them to remember. Click that button, subscribe. The next story might be the one you were meant to hear.